So I started programming in 1979 on an Apple II, and I really liked video games, and I was just, I don't know, just amazed by all these things moving around on the screen. And I remember when I was a kid, we used to go to Bruno's Pizza Parlor for lunch on Sunday afternoons, and one day we went there and they had a Space Invaders machine, and we'd never seen that before. I think it came out in 78 or something like that, I don't know. And I just remember my brother and I putting quarters into it all the time and just being fascinated. I know by today's standards it's ridiculously simple, but just the idea that you could play a game on a TV screen, I was just really curious on how that was possible. How do you do that? And so fast forward a couple years, and my parents bought me a VIC-20 and then a Commodore 64, and that was my first experience with making sound on computers, and learned to write video games, learned assembly language, and I learned subtractive synthesis from the SID chip in the Commodore 64, and it was a lot of fun, and it was just great being able to make music that way. And so I started making video games, and I wrote a clone of Mario Brothers, of the arcade game, on the VIC-20, and it was fully playable. And that was in the early 80s. And then I just dabbled with programming for quite some time and didn't really put out my first, commercial game or try to sell something until around 2000. And so I started writing video games for the Palm Pilot, for various cell phones that ran Java back in the day, flip phones and whatnot. And my method for doing computer music was, I found a synthesizer made by a Swedish company called Electron. It was the Electron Mono Machine, and it simulated the SID chip from the Commodore 64, which I was very familiar with, in hardware, in a small little desktop synthesizer. And I used that for years for sound effects, for just songs in the game, background music, whatnot. But it was really tedious. The process was, I would have to create a sound or a sequence or something on the mono machine. Then I would create the MIDI in Logic, send the MIDI to the mono machine, record the output from the mono machine back into Logic with an Apogee Duet, and then you'd have to go in and trim it, you'd have to normalize it, you'd have to whatever to make it sound good and be the right length, and then you'd have to export it, then you'd have to convert it to a CAF file, and then you could put it into your project, build your game, test it, and see what it actually sounded like on a mobile device. And if it wasn't right, or you didn't like it, or you wanted to change it, then you'd go back, change the sound on the mono machine, change your MIDI in Logic, and start all over again, do it all over. And it was really tedious, monotonous, and I don't know how many hours I spent going in circles in that workflow, just to try to get something that I really liked for a game. And I got to thinking, there's got to be an easier way. About 10 years ago, I started dabbling in digital signal processing, writing the code that would actually produce audio in a computer in real time. And so I thought to myself, I could write a tool that would automate all of this, right? So I worked on learning DSP for a few years and created a command line program, and I called it Moby Chip, and you could define instruments and waves and patterns and songs and all the detail for music or sound effects in a text file. And then you would run that on the command line with this Moby Chip executable, and it would output an audio file in various formats, and they would be perfectly trimmed, they would be normalized, they would be exactly what I needed, and it was wonderful. I saved myself a ton of time. So I started using that for all my sound effects, using it for all my music, and I could just go in, change the text file a little bit, run the app, it would produce the file, I would drop it right into the project and run it and check it out, and it was awesome. But not really consumable for most people. Having been working with computers for almost 40 years now, I'm not really scared of the command line. But what I wanted to do was, how can I take this technology and make it available to everybody, and regardless of your skill level working with computers? So I created an iPad app that uses this Moby Chip engine. I called it the same thing, Moby Chip. And now on an iPad you can go in and create music, sound effects, whatever you want. It still has all the features of old school trackers, but it's probably almost as easy to use as the Music Maker in Mario Paint. And now that's going to be available for purchase on the App Store for an iPad. And it's sample accurate. It's 4 tracks. Each track is monophonic, and the instrument, you can have user-defined waveforms that are 4-bit and 32 samples. So it's a lot like the Game Boy's wave channel. And you can adjust all the different parameters per note in the song or in the phrase, and it's just great.